And Denis, talking about the attack on Congress, also on Vice President Truman. Can you talk about the actions of Pedro Albizu Campos, why he did what he did, for those who are not at all familiar with this history?
Well, there was, at that time, you have to, if you make an empathic leap to the 50s and earlier, you have to realize that Puerto Rico was, let's call it a nation. It was a nation separated by an ocean, a language, a culture, 400 years of Ibero-American history. If you say that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, what happened in Puerto Rico never happened at all. You could literally shoot 17 people during the Ponce massacre and then deceive the mainland, claiming that the police had acted in self-defense. They even rearranged the corpses. They choreographed the setting a la Lena Riefenstahl and created a different reality and somehow created the reality that the Puerto Ricans were shooting themselves. Similarly, in the 1950s context, President Truman said that this was dismissed everything, even though there had been an assassination attempt against him, as an incident between Puerto Ricans. Well, this incident involved the deployment of 5,000 National Guard troops, the arrest of 3,000 Puerto Ricans, and the bombing in broad daylight of 2 towns. The New York Times reported it as that Jayuya looked like it had like an earthquake had hit it. Yeah, the earthquake was the bombing, but the New York Times said that the nationalists had burned their own town. Within this context of repression, there was an additional law, La Ley de la Mordaza, Law 53, which made it from 1948 to 1957 illegal to utter a word, sing a song, whistle a tune, say anything with respect to the independence of Puerto Rico. Even if you had a flag in your own home, that was a felony and you could be arrested for 10 years.
A Puerto Rican flag. A
Puerto Rican flag. You had carpetas. Over 100,000 Puerto Ricans had secret FBI files open on them. They're the ones that Congressman Serrano had released. 1.8 million pages of secret police surveillance. Under these conditions, you couldn't even get word off the island. The information was controlled by, say, half a dozen AP and UPI wire service reporters. So within that context, Albizu Campos realized he had FBI agents following him all over the island, about a series of 25 of them in platoons. So at any given time, there was 6 FBI agents. They had to do something very striking. They had to engage in some dramatic gesture to galvanize the world's attention. It was modeled actually after the Easter Rising in Ireland in 1916. So the idea wasn't to defeat the most powerful empire on earth. It was just to confront that reality and have especially the UN Decolonization Committee realize that there was a serious problem in Puerto Rico because there was a referendum vote coming up to create the Commonwealth. So there was a great urgency that kicked in. It wasn't fanaticism. It wasn't Reds. It wasn't the way that even we heard it on this newscast. It was a very specific and necessary action to let the world know the seriousness of the conditions in Puerto Rico.
So explain what they did.
They had an island-wide, I'd say 8 towns. They tried to secure guns by attacking police precincts. It started with a prison breakout led by Correa Cotto, a somewhat famous criminal. As the police were then chasing these fugitives, 110 fugitives around the island, they attacked in these 8 towns, particularly in Utuado and Jayuya. The idea was to attack the police precincts and then retreat to Utuado, which is a very centrally located town, nestled in some mountains, and hold out for a period of a week or 2 so that they could get word out during that period of time to the world. It was more of a symbolic act. It wasn't really a military act. So the point was to get that word out, and it was for that reason that the United States suppressed it immediately. The reprisals were across the board. 3,000 Puerto Ricans were arrested. 2 towns were bombed in broad daylight, and the only word that you heard in the United States was that there were these fanatics in Puerto Rico, and that it was an incident between these fanatics. Well,
not only that, but that was in that context that the attack of the nationalists on Blair House occurred. It was during that same uprising.
And what happened there? The Blair House attack.
When Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torres Sola, two nationalists, because communication had been cut from the island to the United States about what was happening, they figured they would go to Washington and attempt to assassinate President Truman, who at that time was staying at the Blair House because the White House was under reconstruction, and they had a shootout right outside of the Blair House with a couple and actually killed one officer and wounded another.
Yeah, the ironic context of this is that George Orwell's 1984 had been published just in 1949, and it was a huge best-selling hit in both the United States and Great Britain in 1949. And yet, in 1950, we have this Orwellian circumstance in Puerto Rico where you have this island-wide revolution, and you have President Truman napping in his underwear up in Washington, and people try and shoot him, and yet they dismiss it as an incident between Puerto Ricans, as if nothing was wrong in Puerto Rico. It was an Orwellian situation.